Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter for boxing-related tweets, or you can subscribe to the channel, hit that notifications button, and get a new notification whenever a new video is uploaded. Let's talk boxing. We're going to start off talking about Billy Joe Saunders again. I know we've been doing it quite a bit this week since the fight and prior to the fight, but it's a story that continues to evolve. It's an ever-evolving story that people are interested in. So we've got to discuss this because there's new controversy that has manifested itself. After that, we're going to talk about Canelo Alvarez and the prospect of him fighting in the UK, we're told, next year. Something Eddie Hearn has hinted at if he was to fight in the United Kingdom. We're going to talk about which fighters between middleweight and light heavyweight would offer a glimmer of hope of throwing a spanner in the works. Which guys out there could potentially cause an upset and make what would be the start, I guess, of somewhat of a world tour if Canelo was to indeed become the super middleweight undisputed champion. What would make that world tour worthwhile? So we'll talk about Billy Joe Saunders first, and I got a few messages about this, and the first one I got was from Javen Palmer. I think it's pronounced Javen, it might be Javan, at Javen Tweets. He wrote, got any thoughts on the Billy Joe Saunders Mark Tibbs cover-up? All post-fight interviews have been pulled from IFL, seconds out, and behind the gloves. So let's talk about this. First and foremost, let me just say this. I don't personally know for sure that anything has been taken down from any specific channel, okay? I just want to make that clear. What I will say, though, is that I did see the original Mark Tibbs interview, and I can confirm that it is contrasting in its version of events with Ben Davison's latest interview. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about what the potential for motive for all this could be. So starting off with Mark Tibbs, I saw him say initially that he pulled Billy Joe Saunders out because he saw that there was clear damage to the eye, that Billy Joe said he couldn't see, and that he didn't get the response he wanted from his fighter. Now, Ben Davison has since come out and he said that he's the one that pulled out Billy Joe Saunders, that Billy Joe Saunders wanted to go on, but that the trainers pulled rank, or he pulled rank, based on the fact that he just thought he couldn't go on. There was too much damage, that he'd given a great account of himself and that he could get the rematch. He proved he wasn't out of his depth. The fight was very close. And that Billy was saying no, as in, no, I want to continue. And he may have, he said, he may have, but you'd have to check with him because it was loud and so on and so forth. He may have even mumbled the words orthodox, as though to say, if my lead eye is injured and I can no longer fight from a southpaw stance, I'm willing to fight from an orthodox stance. Now, with all due respect, and I'm not making any accusations here, but with all due respect, and I mean with all due respect, because I do understand the motives, and we'll go into that in a moment, I don't believe Ben Davison here. The reason I don't believe Ben Davison is because, look, I didn't see anything from the little that we did see in that corner to suggest that these things were said. To me, Billy Joe Saunders looked concussed. And I said this immediately after the fight in the post-fight interview. Now, by the same token, not getting the response you wanted, as Mark Tibbs is saying, doesn't necessarily mean he said, I quit. Or they asked him, do you want to continue? And he didn't answer, or he said no, as a lot of people are sort of suggesting. That doesn't mean that at all. It may have been something a lot simpler than that. Like, Billy, do you know what error you made to get caught with an uppercut? And if he couldn't process what they were saying and he couldn't understand it, then he's showing that he's not giving the response that they want. If they've covered one eye and they've said, how many fingers am I holding up? And he said, I can't see. That's not giving the response he would have wanted. Or even if he'd guessed 2 and actually it was 3, that's not giving the response he would have wanted. So not giving the response you want could literally be down to him being dizzy and not knowing where he is and concussed, rather than him saying, I don't want to go out and fight anymore. Okay. But why would they potentially, let's say for argument's sake, and again, I have no evidence to suggest this, but let's say for argument's sake, his management team, or indeed his trainers, or the interviewers themselves to protect Billy Joe, let's say somebody made the decision to pull these interviews, if that's the case, why would Ben Davison then come out with a contrasting position? Well, let's talk about why. Because we're living in a period right now where many boxing fans are very, very fickle. This is the reality. Let's look at someone like Guillermo Rigondeaux. Great fighter. One of the great fighters of his generation in his weight category. Nobody wanted any of it. Frampton, Quigg, Leo Santa Cruz, brilliant fighters, all of them in their day, in their heyday. They used to talk about fighting each other Like, Rigondeaux didn't even exist. Rigondeaux was the best in the division. Eventually, Rigondeaux can't get a fight. You have a lot of fans who are sort of enabling this avoidance and this duck by referring to him as boring, and that's why he can't get a fight. Since when has that ever stopped a top level fighter from, you know, from challengers from wanting to challenge top level fighters, right? He has to go up 2 weight categories to fight Lomachenko, loses, and that was a quit because he didn't receive serious damage. He was just getting schooled perhaps against an even better fighter who is significantly bigger. And then after that, they made out like Rigondeaux didn't exist anymore. In other words, a great fighter gets a loss and his career goes to pot. Same thing happened with, not to the same extent because he's yet to fight again, but a similar sort of things happened to Lomachenko himself. Lomachenko himself, how long did we hear, there's no other word to say it, but haters really question whether he's even really a genuinely top fighter. He has to go through multiple weight categories, gets to Teofimo Lopez, loses a fairly close fight, a clear loss. It was 7-5 or 8-4. I was leaning towards 8-4 to Teofimo Lopez, but he didn't get battered and he finished strong. Now, he was in the top, what, 1, 2, 3 max pound for pound fighters in the world. If one of the top 3 pound for pound fighters in the world loses a fight on points where he ends up coming on strong, surely the world should be screaming for a rematch. Not only is the world not screaming for a rematch, you got a lot of people saying he was exposed, and they're talking about the American 4 Kings, as though Loma doesn't even exist anymore. So these sorts of things happen consistently. Deontay Wilder. Listen, I really like Sam Jones, okay? I think he's got character. You know, I like him. I like listening to him. I find him entertaining. Now, he represents Joe Joyce, so you'll expect some bias in favour of Joe Joyce, but he was asked in a recent interview to give his top 5 heavyweights. And he said, out of respect, I have to put Fury and AJ 1 and 2. Then I genuinely believe it's Joe Joyce. And then he's sitting there and he's thinking, he goes, then I have to go with Dillian White. And then he carries on thinking, and the host says, what about Deontay Wilder? And he went, oh, yeah, I forgot. Deontay Wilder, yeah, that's my top 5. I'm not being funny, but up until a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, Deontay Wilder was knocking everybody over. People were saying AJ Wilder's a 50-50 fight. He was the heavy favourite to beat Tyson Fury ahead of the first fight. And all of a sudden, because he has, you know, 1, or in many people's eyes, 2 defeats against the man who's possibly the best heavyweight in the world, possibly, arguably, all of a sudden, you don't even remember him to put him in the top 5. This is the reality of boxing. So when you look at someone like Billy Joe Saunders, a 2-time middleweight and super middleweight champion of the world, whose only defeat came after a fairly competitive super middleweight fight against the pound for pound #1 fighter in the world, the consensus #1 pound for pound fighter in the world, and the focus is more on he's a quitter, you can see how easy it would be for him to be frozen out and not get another chance, not get another shot, for people to forget that this guy even exists. That's how fickle the sport is. So what's Ben Davison doing? He's backing his boy. What are MTK probably doing by speaking to these, and this is speculative, right? Because I don't know if they've spoken to anybody, and I don't know if IFL Seconds Out and Behind the Gloves have taken down interviews. But if, for argument's sake, such a thing has happened, what would be the motive behind this? The motive would be, let's try and protect our asset. Because we know what boxing fans are like. Back in the day, a lot of people today, they say, oh yeah, you know what? Boxers of the past, they used to love to fight each other. There was none of this ducking and protecting your O. That's because your O wasn't as important back then as it was now. You could have multiple defeats on your record and you'd go down as one of the great fighters. Today, that doesn't happen. You get that O on your record, that O goes, you get that L on your record. All of a sudden, people are talking about you like you're a bum. So, you know, we're in that situation right now whereby clearly Ben Davison is worried about his friend, and he's come up with what I believe to be, and again, this is just my personal opinion. I could very well be wrong. Maybe they can release the footage. Anthony Yard has since released footage where it shows the corner of Lyndon Arthur and what they were saying mid-fight, to show that what they then said post-fight about hand injuries and stuff like that was perhaps untrue. That's according to Anthony Yard, and he's presented the evidence, right? I'm sure they could do something like that. Show the evidence where it was you that made the decision, where you're the one that said, you know, maybe even if you can pick up Billy Joe mumbling the words orthodox, it puts it all to bed, right? But even if that's not the case, which I suspect it isn't the case, and I don't believe Ben Davison, like I said, I respect why he's doing it. He's backing his boy. He's realizing if I don't do this, he's going to be unfairly criticized. And yeah, I need to protect my friend. That's all it is. So I get that people are sitting there going, oh, they're insulting our intellect. I get that. But by the same token, I've always said this, and I continue to say this, always understand the motive of someone. Whatever act they engage in, whatever words they mumble, more important than the words, more important than the act, is the motive. And the motive is that he has incorrectly assumed, in my opinion, that for damage limitation, this is the best way forward. For me, this does more damage. This does more damage because people are sort of saying, what is he on about? They're blatantly lying. But I get it. I understand the motive. I do, because of the amount of unfair treatment that boxers get from fickle fans. And they're concerned about the product and the reputation of Billy Joe Saunders. That's my take on it. Now, moving on from that, let's talk about Canelo Alvarez and the talk of him potentially coming to the UK next year to fight here, basically. He's got a massive fan base in the UK and indeed around the world. And if, as expected, he does become the super middleweight undisputed champion, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful manner at all to Caleb Plant, but that is what they are clearly expecting, then they're going to look at, obviously, to go on some sort of a world tour, and where better to start than the UK? They're hoping if stadiums can be filled by then, or big arenas, and who knows, Canelo Alvarez might want to experience the British atmosphere too and further grow the product and his legacy. Now, if that was to happen, who could potentially fight him? Whereby they could offer a chance of beating him, offer a glimmer of hope for the British fight fans to make the fight particularly interesting. Well, one obvious guy that is being spoken about as an opponent is John Ryder, because you know, he flew over as a potential replacement for Billy Joe Saunders. He's a very, I saw John Ryder early in his career and very early in his career. And I really liked what I saw. I thought this guy's really talented. And I came out here and I was telling people, listen, this guy's going to get to world level, I believe. And he has indeed gone on to do that. He fought Callum Smith for the super middleweight title, the WBA and the WBC. And I personally, it was the diamond belt for the WBC, I think. And I felt, won that fight. He lost the fight on the cards, but I felt like he won the fight. Regardless of, whichever way you put it, he showed his ability to be at world level. And after some defeats that he really shouldn't have had, where I felt like he underachieved, I thought he was talented enough to beat Nick Blackwell for sure, and definitely Rocky Fielding too. They're defeats that, he'll be unhappy with losing, put it that way. Having said that, he has bounced back, he has built a career, and he's gotten himself to where he really should have been. His nickname is the Gorilla because of the style of physique he has, the quite rangy arms with quite thick set neck and stuff like that. So a lot of people will look at that and say, well, at least physically he might be able to deal with Canelo Alvarez. If he can get up close and he can, wrestle him a little bit, who knows what can happen. The truth is, while I'd love to see John Ryder get his shot at another big fighter, I think he's definitely not at that Canelo Alvarez level. Not yet anyway. Who knows how a fighter can develop going forward, but he's 32 years old. I think he'd have to beat a big name apart from that Smith fight where he could have got the decision before we start talking about him in that regard. Another potential, though, is Chris Eubank Jr. Now, Chris Eubank Jr., I personally believe, has more of a chance against a 39 or 40-year-old Gennady Golovkin. Because as I've explained, Golovkin is a sort of fighter who will absorb shots on the arms, cover up elbows, forearms, top of the forehead where he can't really be hurt. And then when you're done with your flurry and you're on your way out, he'll follow you out and then he destroys you. So he's always making you work, whether he's chasing you or whether he's letting you unload on him from a safe position. He sets a tempo that is very, very hard to live with. But in theory, a guy that can get inside, land flurries, and then get out without Golovkin being able to land anything in return might be able to outwork Golovkin. Okay, stylistically, for instance, a guy like Sugar Ray Leonard, I believe, would have caused Golovkin all sorts of problems. Indeed, Danny Jacobs probably gave Golovkin his toughest fight of his career. Not probably, I think he did. I don't share the view of those that felt Canelo won that second fight. So, stylistically, Eubank might be thinking to himself, you never know. I'm decent when people are chasing me. I'll get inside if I can, let go of some flurries and then get out. But against Canelo, I'm not sure that works well for him at all. I think Canelo is far too destructive with his body punching, and Eubank can be, as we know, a little bit reckless in the way he enters. And yeah, I just think he'd get countered. And I don't think that's a good fight for Eubank. It would be exciting while it lasted, though. The other potentials, therefore, is moving up to light heavyweight in terms of names that could really potentially cause him problems and capture the imagination. Here, we see much more of an interest, in my opinion. And I want you guys to hear me out, because I'm not saying these guys necessarily beat Canelo Alvarez, but there's enough question marks there to make me think, that's something I'd want to see. And first and foremost, I want to start off with Callum Johnson. Callum Johnson is a very aggressive guy who throws a lot of powerful, short shots. You saw him drop Beterbiev. You saw him in his last fight, how aggressive he was and how destructive he can be at that inner mid-range. He can also get caught. We saw him dropped a couple of times and stopped against Beterbiev. We saw Emil Markic drop him as well prior to that, or hurt him at least. And he didn't drop him, he hurt him. But you've also seen, like I said, his destructive power against Markic, against Shawnee Monaghan, against Beterbiev, against Frank Buglioni. So I can imagine that fight looking a little bit like the earlier fight that he had with James Kirkland. Kirkland comes in. At one point, he seemed to affect Canelo, seemed to hurt Canelo a little bit with some shots. And ultimately, it was Canelo's powerful counter-punching and upper body movement that really took Kirkland out. But yeah, there could be interesting moments like that. I could imagine Johnson flying across the ring, trying to impose his size with big, powerful, short hooks. And that could be an exciting fight while it lasts. So that would be one I'd definitely be interested in watching. Another one would be Anthony Yard. Because, listen, I know a lot of people are going to say, what are you talking about, Chris, man? Anthony Yard just lost to Lyndon Arthur. Lyndon Arthur might be ranked number 3 in the world, I think, by the WBO. But it's Lyndon Arthur. He's domestic. He's not going to be able to live with Canelo Alvarez. The thing is, though, styles make fights. And if you look at what Anthony Yard has struggled with, it's against two guys with brilliant jabs who are taller than him and can maintain some range and can box. Guys like I said, Lyndon Arthur and Sergei Kovalev. And he had Kovalev hurt. He had him reeling. He was, in my opinion, 1 or 2 punches away from taking him out. Albeit past his best, Kovalev, it was still a performance where he could have won the fight. Against Lyndon Arthur, he got going too late, but he hurt Lyndon Arthur late on, again by leaping in. He has that one punch power, and he's also got some good upper body movement where he's hard to hit flush. So against a guy like Canelo Alvarez, who's a smaller man, and everybody talks about this great chin, this iron chin, you know that Anthony Yard, with his reflexes and his athletic ability, if he can bypass that jab and work his way in and lead with some big power shots, who knows how Canelo Alvarez copes against a big punching light heavyweight. A guy who is at the peak of his physical prowess. That becomes an interesting fight, right? You'd back Canelo on overall skill and things like that, and he can be destructive in his own right. But when Yard was stopped by Kovalev, he gassed and he was dropped. He was stopped by a jab, but he'd had his gas tank punched out of him. When you watch those old computer games like Street Fighter, where the energy bar, style Tekken or Mortal Kombat or whatever, the energy bar starts to reduce with every shot, right? It's as though his energy bar reduced completely against Kovalev. It wasn't a one-punch knockout. So I could imagine there being some really exciting moments in that fight. I really could, especially in a year from now, say, where Anthony Yard would have gone on potentially to develop a lot more. That does bring us on to Lyndon Arthur. And while I think Lyndon Arthur is a very good technical boxer, I don't think he'd be able to hold off Canelo. I think, although when he's got his back on the ropes, he does roll with shots quite well. But that tends to be when guys are headhunting him. Against someone like Canelo Alvarez, who'll rip that body, I don't think a taller jabber like Lyndon Arthur or indeed Craig Spider Richards would be able to deal with Canelo Alvarez. That's just my honest take on it. Joshua Buatsi's more of a straight up boxer. Big future ahead of him. Still not ready, in my opinion, for Canelo Alvarez. So for me, Callum Johnson and Anthony Yard would be the two that I'd be most excited about seeing between middleweight and super middleweight. The problem is both guys are with Frank Warren. So is there any way, I know he's not yet signed with DAZN, he's a free agent at the moment, Canelo Alvarez, but if he was to come to the UK, you would imagine he would be working with Eddie Hearn, who he's clearly very happy with. Would Eddie be willing to bring one of those two guys from across the street with Frank Warren to make that fight happen? Who knows? Let me know what you think, guys. Who would you want to see Canelo Alvarez fight if that fight is going to happen in the UK, assuming he was to have beaten Caleb Plant and become the super middleweight champion of the world? I know a lot of you are going to say, no, I want to see him fight Charlo, I want to see him fight Beterbiev, Bivol, whoever else, Golovkin again. Forget that. We're talking about British fighters. If it was a fight in Britain, you'd assume that he's going to go up against a British fighter. Let me know who you think's got the best chance and who you'd like to see him fight between middleweight and light heavyweight. Additionally to that, let me know what you think about this whole thing about, the alleged cover-up. If it has indeed happened, which is very possible, do you understand what I'm saying here about the motives and why people shouldn't get on their cases too much? I get it. I understand it. You might think, oh my word, they're insulting the public. Fair enough. And I do agree that it's unlikely to be true. And I guess they could set the record straight if they want by releasing footage. But I kind of get it based on how fickle boxing fans have become in this modern day and age. Let me know what you think about this. Thanks for watching. Chat to you soon, everyone. Take care. God bless.